Hatred is one of the most misunderstood human emotions. Most people believe it begins with conflict, disagreement, or moral difference. But hatred does not begin in the outer world. It begins in the unseen interior of the human psyche. Here is the first truth that changes everything. Hatred is rarely a response to who you are. It is a reaction to what you represent. When someone meets you and responds with hostility that feels excessive, irrational, or personal, they are not responding to your actions alone. They are encountering something within you that awakens a buried tension inside themselves. Something they once denied, something they could not become, something they were forced to abandon in order to belong, survive, or be accepted. Hatred feels personal because it arrives with intensity. It looks at you, speaks to you, targets you. The mind immediately assumes, this is about me. But psychological truth reveals something far deeper and far less individual. Hatred is never born in isolation. It is not a clean response to a single person or moment. It is the overflow of an inner conflict that existed long before you entered the picture. When someone expresses hatred toward you, they are not reacting only to your words, actions, or presence. They are responding to what you activate within them. Human beings carry unintegrated parts of themselves, traits, desires, fears, and potentials that were suppressed early in life. These rejected aspects do not disappear. They remain alive in the unconscious, seeking expression. When another person embodies or reflects one of these disowned parts, tension arises. This is why hatred often appears irrational. It exceeds the situation. It feels disproportionate. The emotional charge does not match the event. That excess emotion belongs to something older, deeper, and unresolved. You become the trigger, not the cause. Hatred is projection with emotional force. The psyche protects itself from internal conflict by externalizing it. Instead of confronting a denied part of the self, the mind places it onto someone else. That person becomes the symbol of everything the individual cannot face within. If you represent freedom, they may hate you for being irresponsible. If you represent sensitivity, they may hate you for being weak. If you represent confidence, they may accuse you of arrogance. The accusation reveals more about the accuser than the accused. What makes hatred particularly powerful is that it feels morally justified to the one who carries it. The person believes they are reacting to a flaw, a threat, or an injustice. They are unaware that the true threat is internal. Awareness would require responsibility, and responsibility would require change. Hatred allows the psyche to avoid that work. This is why trying to correct hatred with logic rarely succeeds. You cannot reason someone out of a defense mechanism they are not conscious of using. Facts do not dissolve projections. Explanations do not heal inner splits. Hatred is not seeking truth, it is seeking relief from inner tension. Understanding this changes how you experience being hated. Instead of collapsing inward and questioning your worth, you begin to observe the dynamic. You notice patterns. Who reacts strongly to your boundaries? Who becomes hostile when you remain calm? Who resents your growth? Who mocks what they secretly admire? Over time, a pattern emerges. Hatred follows authenticity. When you live in alignment with yourself, you disturb those who live in self-betrayal. Your existence becomes a reminder of a choice they did not make. That reminder can feel unbearable. Hatred is often grief disguised as anger. It is the grief of an unlived life. The grief of suppressed truth, a grief of potential abandoned for safety or approval. Rather than feel that grief, the psyche turns outward and attacks the mirror. This does not mean hatred should be tolerated or excused. Understanding is not the same as submission. Psychological insight does not require you to stay in harmful situations. It allows you to disengage without internalizing the poison. The danger lies in responding unconsciously. When you react emotionally to hatred, you accept the role assigned to you. You become the enemy in someone else's inner war. Your reaction feeds the projection and strengthens the bond. This is why hatred can feel addictive on both sides. It creates a loop of stimulation and validation. The most powerful response is inner separation. You recognize that the emotion being thrown at you does not belong to you. You refuse to carry what was never yours. This inner refusal is not aggressive. It is grounded, it is calm, it is clear. In that clarity, something shifts. Hatred begins to lose its grip because it no longer finds a surface to attach to. Projections require participation. Without emotional reaction, they collapse back into the unconscious of the one who created them. There is also a subtle invitation hidden in hatred. It asks you to examine yourself honestly, not to accept false accusations, but to check for resonance. If something hurts deeply, it may touch a wound still seeking integration. If something does not touch you at all, it confirms that the issue lies elsewhere. Hatred then becomes a diagnostic tool. It shows where consciousness is lacking in the relationship. It reveals where growth has occurred and where it has not. It clarifies which connections are based on mutual integration and which are based on shared avoidance. The moment you fully grasp that hatred is never about you alone, you stop shrinking under it. You stop defending your existence. You stop negotiating your authenticity. You stand psychologically upright, aware that what is being aimed at you is part of a much larger inner struggle unfolding. In another human being who has not yet learned how to face themselves, the unconscious never introduces itself politely. It does not announce its presence with logic or reason. It enters through feeling. Sudden anger, irrational jealousy, intense attraction, deep resentment, unexplained fear, these are not random reactions. They are signals. Emotion is the first language of what has been buried. The shadow is made of everything a person was not allowed, encouraged, or permitted to be. Traits judged unacceptable, unsafe, or unlovable are pushed out of awareness early in life. This rejection is rarely conscious. It happens quietly through social conditioning, family expectations, and the need to belong. Over time, the psyche learns what to display and what to hide. The hidden material does not vanish, it waits. Because the shadow lives outside conscious awareness, it cannot speak through reason. It has no direct access to words or explanations. Emotion becomes its messenger. When something in the outer world resembles a disowned part of the self, the shadow is activated. The result is an emotional surge that feels sudden, overwhelming, and difficult to control. This is why people are often confused by their strongest reactions. They say, I don't know why this makes me so angry, or this shouldn't bother me, but it does. The intensity is the clue. The shadow always announces itself through disproportionate emotion. Anger is one of its most common expressions. Not because anger is bad, but because it is energizing. It pushes outward. It protects the ego from inner collapse. When a person encounters something that threatens their carefully constructed self-image, the shadow rises in defense. The emotional reaction creates distance from the truth that is trying to surface. Jealousy functions the same way. It appears when someone else embodies a quality or life path that the individual secretly desires but has denied themselves. Rather than admit longing or regret, the psyche transforms the pain into envy or contempt. Emotion becomes a shield against self-recognition. Even attraction can be a shadow response. Intense fascination often points to qualities the conscious personality lacks or represses. The shadow does not only carry what is dark or destructive, it also holds vitality, creativity, confidence, and depth. When these qualities are encountered in another, emotion flares because the psyche recognizes something familiar yet forbidden. Fear is another voice of the shadow, not rational fear, but vague anxiety or discomfort around certain people, ideas, or situations. This fear often signals proximity to inner material that has not yet been integrated. The psyche reacts emotionally to avoid conscious confrontation. What makes shadow-driven emotions so compelling is how convincing it feels. In the moment, the emotion appears justified. The mind quickly constructs explanations to support it. Stories are formed. Judgments are made. The ego believes it is responding to external reality, unaware that it is acting as a spokesperson for something internal. This is why emotional reactions often feel urgent. They demand expression. They seek discharge. The shadow wants to be seen, but not directly. It wants relief without exposure. The key to psychological maturity is learning to pause at the moment of emotional intensity, not to suppress the feeling, but to observe it. Instead of asking, what is wrong with them? The deeper question becomes, what within me is being touched right now? This shift transforms emotion from a weapon into a doorway. When emotion is examined rather than acted out, it begins to reveal its origin. Anger may uncover suppressed assertiveness. Jealousy may reveal unacknowledged desire. Fear may point to growth that feels threatening to an old identity. Attraction may highlight unlived potential. The shadow resists direct confrontation, but it responds to curiosity. It softens when approached without judgment. The moment a person claims responsibility for their emotional reactions, the shadow loses its grip. It no longer needs to shout through feeling because it has been invited into awareness. This does not mean emotional reactions disappear. It means they change function. They become information rather than compulsion, guidance rather than disruption. People who never examine their emotions remain controlled by them. Their lives are shaped by unconscious reactions, repeated conflicts, and misunderstood patterns. They believe they are responding to the world, when in reality, they are constantly responding to their own unseen interior. Those who listen differently develop inner authority. They recognize that the first emotional reaction is rarely the final truth. They allow the feeling to arise without immediate expression. In that space, something remarkable happens. The emotion begins to speak more clearly. Its message becomes intelligible. The shadow does not want to destroy consciousness. It wants to complete it. Emotion is the knock at the door. Whether that door becomes a battleground or an opening depends on the willingness to stay present with discomfort. The moment emotion is no longer feared, judged, or acted out blindly, it becomes a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious. The shadow steps out of the darkness not as an enemy, but as a lost part of the self-seeking recognition. Attack rarely targets what is empty. It does not fixate on what is inert, predictable, or deadened. It seeks movement. It seeks energy. It seeks life. When something is attacked repeatedly, an idea, a person, a quality, it is often because it carries vitality that unsettles those who have learned to live without it. What is alive disrupts comfort. Life expresses itself through growth, change, intensity, and presence. These qualities challenge systems built on stagnation and routine. A person who lives with inner aliveness does not need to provoke conflict. Their mere existence becomes a disturbance to those who have adapted to emotional numbness or spiritual resignation. The attack is not always loud or obvious. It can arrive as criticism, ridicule, exclusion, or subtle undermining. But the source is the same: discomfort in the presence of life. People who have learned to suppress their own vitality often feel threatened by those who embody it naturally. Aliveness reminds them of what they sacrificed to survive, to belong, or to remain safe. That reminder can feel like an accusation, even when none is intended. This is why originality attracts resistance. New ideas, unconventional paths, emotional honesty, and creative expression are often met with hostility before they are met with understanding. What is alive refuses to conform entirely, and conformity is the currency of psychological safety for many. The living thing exposes the cost of adaptation. Attack is a defensive response. It is the psyche's attempt to restore equilibrium when something destabilizing enters the field. Rather than adapt internally, the system tries to neutralize the disturbance externally. This is easier than confronting one's own rigidity. The living becomes the enemy because it reveals what has gone dormant. Aliveness is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it appears as quiet self-trust, emotional depth, or the ability to remain present. Even this can provoke attack. Calm presence unsettles those who survive through chaos. Emotional steadiness threatens those who depend on drama to feel alive. Integrity challenges those who rely on compromise to avoid conflict. The attack often disguises itself as concern, advice, or moral judgment. Be realistic. Don't take yourself so seriously. Who do you think you are? These phrases are not neutral. They are attempts to pull life back into manageable limits. They serve as psychological restraints placed on what refuses to shrink. The more alive something is, the more pressure it creates. Life demands response. It asks others to either grow or defend. Growth requires effort and risk. Defense requires aggression or dismissal. Many choose defense. This is why children, before they are conditioned, often experience strong pushback for their curiosity, sensitivity, and intensity. These qualities are alive, and aliveness is inconvenient. Over time, many learn to dim themselves. They internalize the attack. They turn it inward. They become less alive to avoid conflict. But not everyone does. Some people preserve their aliveness despite resistance. They continue to feel deeply, think independently, and move toward what feels true. These individuals often encounter repeated attacks, not because they are wrong, but because they remain responsive to life itself. Understanding this changes how attack is perceived. Instead of interpreting it as proof of inadequacy, it can be seen as evidence of vitality. This does not mean every attack is meaningful or justified. It means that persistent resistance often signals that something authentic is trying to emerge. Attack also reveals where life has been denied. Those who attack what is alive are often protecting their own psychological structures. They have invested heavily in who they had to become to survive. Anything that threatens that identity feels dangerous. The attack is not personal, it is structural. It is the defense of a system that fears collapse. Life, by its nature, dissolves rigid structures. It grows where it is not permitted. It questions what has been accepted. It refuses to remain static. This makes it inherently threatening to systems built on control. When you understand that what is attacked is usually what is alive, you begin to relate differently to opposition. You stop rushing to extinguish your vitality to gain acceptance. You stop interpreting resistance as a signal to retreat. Instead, you examine where the pressure is coming from and why. There is a crucial distinction between constructive feedback and destructive attack. Feedback engages. Attack seeks to suppress. Feedback invites dialogue. Attack demands conformity. Learning to recognize this difference protects aliveness without turning it into arrogance. Aliveness does not need to fight to justify itself, needs space to breathe. The tragedy occurs when the attacked internalize the aggression and begin to police their own vitality. They censor their thoughts, mute their emotions, and restrict their aspirations. In doing so, they accomplish what the attack sought to achieve. Those who remain alive learn a different response. They stay grounded. They remain connected to their inner movement. They do not harden or collapse. They let the attack pass without allowing it to define them. Over time, something becomes clear. Attack exhausts itself. It cannot sustain energy indefinitely. Life, however, renews itself. It adapts. It grows stronger through contact. What is alive may be challenged, but it is rarely destroyed by opposition because it draws energy from a deeper source than approval or safety. Reaction feels natural. It feels justified. It feels necessary. When something threatens, insults, or destabilizes us, the impulse to respond immediately arises without effort. The body tightens. The mind accelerates, and emotion demands expression. Yet, what feels like self-defense is often self-betrayal. Reaction strengthens the very force it seeks to defeat. The inner enemy is not the external trigger. It is the unexamined pattern inside that the trigger activates. Reaction gives that pattern energy. It validates its urgency. It confirms its authority. Every time reaction occurs without awareness, the unconscious gains control while the conscious mind believes it is taking action. The psyche learns through repetition. If an emotional pattern consistently receives expression through reaction, it becomes reinforced. Anger becomes quicker. Fear becomes sharper. Defensiveness becomes habitual. The more one reacts, the more automatic the reaction becomes. Over time, the individual is no longer choosing responses. They are being chosen by them. This is how inner enemies are trained. What appears as strength in reaction is often fear in disguise. The immediate response aims to restore a sense of control. It tries to eliminate discomfort by pushing it outward, but discomfort that is expelled without understanding returns with greater force. Reaction postpones insight and multiplies conflict. When someone provokes you and you react, you confirm the provocation's power. You accept the role assigned to you. The external conflict becomes internalized. The nervous system memorizes the exchange. The psyche prepares for repetition. Reaction creates continuity for what should have been a moment. Silence interrupts this process. Not silence as avoidance, but silence as containment. In that pause, something remarkable occurs. The inner enemy is denied expression. Without expression, it weakens. It cannot grow without energy. Reaction is its fuel. Every emotional reaction carries a belief that the feeling must be acted upon immediately. This belief is false. Emotion can exist without behavior. Feeling does not require discharge. When emotion is allowed to rise and fall without reaction, it reveals its impermanence. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. The enemy within thrives on identification. The moment you say, I am angry, instead of anger is present, the emotion gains identity. It merges with the self. Reaction seals that merger. Awareness loosens it. Reaction also blends perception. In the reactive state, the mind narrows. Complexity is lost. Everything becomes personal. Nuance disappears. This is why reactive conflicts escalate quickly. Each reaction invites a counter-reaction. The inner enemy recruits the outer world, confirm its narrative. The cost of constant reaction is exhaustion. The psyche remains on high alert. The body carries unresolved tension. Relationships fracture. Patterns repeat. Life begins to feel hostile, not because it is, but because the inner landscape is dominated by unintegrated forces seeking expression. True power lies in response, not reaction. Response requires a pause. That pause creates distance between stimulus and behavior. In that space, consciousness enters. Choice becomes possible. The inner enemy, deprived of immediacy, loses momentum. This does not mean suppressing emotion. Suppression stores energy. Awareness transforms it. When emotion is felt fully without reaction, it moves through the system rather than becoming lodged within it. The psyche learns that it can tolerate intensity without collapse. Reaction is also rooted in the desire to be seen, validated, or understood. The inner enemy believes that expression will bring relief, but relief gained through reaction is temporary. It never resolves the underlying tension. Only insight does. When you stop reacting, you begin to observe patterns. You notice which situations provoke you. You see recurring themes. You recognize old wounds asking for attention. The enemy within is revealed not as a villain, but as a messenger delivering information in a distorted language. Reaction rejects the message and attacks the messenger. Awareness listens. Over time, non-reaction builds inner authority. You no longer feel compelled to prove yourself. Triggers lose intensity. Emotional storms pass more quickly. The psyche reorganizes around stability rather than defense. The most threatening thing to the inner enemy is patience. It cannot survive being watched. It dissolves under sustained attention. Reaction gives it movement. Stillness deprives it of form. When reaction ceases, the outer enemy often fades as well. Without emotional reinforcement, provocation loses purpose. What once felt like opposition reveals itself as noise. The work is not to defeat emotion, but to outgrow compulsion. Each moment of non-reaction weakens the old pattern and strengthens consciousness. The enemy within does not disappear through force. It dissolves through understanding. Hatred has a way of pulling power away from the center of the self. The moment it is encountered, attention shifts outward. Thoughts begin to revolve around the source of hostility, the meaning of the attack, the need to defend, explain, or retaliate. In this shift, inner authority is quietly surrendered. The psyche begins to organize itself around reaction rather than intention. Most people try to overcome hatred by resisting it or proving it wrong. Both responses keep authority external. Resistance keeps the enemy central. Justification places one's worth in the hands of another. Understanding, however, moves in the opposite direction. It brings power back inward. Understanding hatred does not mean agreeing with it or tolerating harm. It means seeing clearly what hatred is, how it functions, and why it appears. Clarity restores sovereignty. Hatred is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of fragmentation. It emerges when inner contradictions remain unresolved and are projected outward. The person consumed by hatred is not anchored in themselves. They are split, divided, and seeking relief through external conflict. When this is understood, the emotional charge of hatred begins to weaken. Inner authority grows the moment hatred is depersonalized. When hatred is no longer interpreted as a verdict on your value, it loses its ability to destabilize. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What is happening psychologically here?" This shift transforms pain into insight. Authority returns to the observer rather than the reaction. People without inner authority depend heavily on external validation. Praise lifts them. Criticism collapses them. Hatred devastates them. Their sense of self fluctuates according to others' emotions. Understanding hatred breaks this dependency. It reveals how unstable external evaluations truly are. Hatred thrives on unconscious participation. It seeks a mirror. It looks for reaction. When you understand this, you stop feeding it. Non-participation is not weakness. It is containment. It is the ability to hold one center while others lose theirs. Inner authority is not dominance. It is self-trust. It is the capacity to remain oriented to one's values despite emotional pressure. Understanding hatred strengthens this capacity by exposing how easily the psyche can be pulled off course when meaning is outsourced. There is a hidden test within every encounter with hatred. The test is not about endurance. It is about orientation. Will you define yourself through opposition, or will you define yourself through awareness? Those who define themselves through opposition remain psychologically reactive. Their identity becomes shaped by what they resist. Their authority remains conditional. Those who define themselves through awareness are less easily moved. They understand that hatred says more about the one who carries it than the one who receives it. Understanding hatred also clarifies boundaries. When hatred is misunderstood, people either overengage or completely withdraw. Overengagement entangles. Total withdrawal avoids growth. Understanding allows for precise response. You know when to step back, when to speak, and when silence is the strongest position. Authority grows from discernment, not rigidity. There is also an internal dimension to hatred that must be faced. The hatred encountered externally often mirrors unexamined self-hatred within. Without awareness, external hostility resonates with internal criticism, amplifying its effect. Understanding hatred outwardly often reveals where inner harshness still exists. As inner authority develops, self-hatred weakens. Compassion replaces judgment. The psyche becomes less divided. External hatred loses resonance because there is nothing inside to echo it. Hatred attempts to define you from the outside. Understanding defines you from within. This is why individuals with strong inner authority are often unmoved by hostility. They do not dismiss it, but they do not absorb it. They recognize its psychological origin. They see the suffering beneath the aggression. They refuse to become a battleground for someone else's unresolved conflict. Understanding hatred also frees energy. Emotional resistance consumes enormous psychological resources. When hatred is understood rather than fought, energy previously spent on defense becomes available for creativity, focus, and growth. Authority is not only emotional stability, it is also the efficient use of inner energy. There is a quiet confidence that emerges when hatred no longer dictates behavior. Decisions become less reactive. Speech becomes more intentional. Silence becomes purposeful rather than fearful. The self feels grounded rather than guarded. Inner authority is not granted by victory over others. It is earned through mastery of perception. Understanding hatred sharpens perception. It strips away illusion. It reveals psychological dynamics that would otherwise remain unconscious. When hatred is understood, it can no longer command attention. It becomes background noise rather than a defining force. In that shift, the self reclaims its center, standing rooted in awareness rather than reaction, guided by clarity rather than fear, no longer needing to prove its worth to voices that speak from fragmentation rather than wholeness.